What's up, everyone? Good morning and welcome to Shaw Locals Bears Insiders podcast. I am Kyle Nabors along with Sean Hammond and Hub Arkush. Guys, it's Monday morning, March 27th, just at 10 a.m. Had a good weekend of watching some college basketball, guys. We got baseball coming here on Thursday night. Really kind of snuck up on me, realizing opening day, the White Sox and Astros playing. Um, you know, I'm up here in the northwest suburb. It snowed over the weekend, so certainly doesn't feel like opening day is right around the corner, guys. But right before we jumped on air, and the place I wanted to start today, there was breaking news. Lamar Jackson tweeting out that he had formally requested a trade from the Baltimore Ravens earlier this month. The Aaron Rodgers saga still unresolved, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the draft today. And my question was to you guys was how confident you were in those four quarterbacks going before the Bears got there. But the Lamar Jackson news, Aaron Rodgers still being out there, that complicates this a little bit. And Hub, I'll start with you. Seeing this Lamar Jackson news, how likely do you think it is that he's traded prior to the draft?
You know, I think he's too good a football player to trade, and too valuable and too hard to replace. And Aaron Rodgers and Lamar Jackson can request trades all they want. You know what's been going on with the Aaron Rodgers story now. I don't know how much of that is Aaron and how much of that is the Packers, but these deals have to work, and that is why, from the Bears' perspective, guys, I think that Ryan Poles did such a good job getting that done before free agency started because he got a good package. And these teams are not just letting these guys go. They're not just going to send them away. So I wouldn't trade Lamar Jackson. There's none of these four quarterbacks that I'd rather have that I know enough about. And I do think all four will go in the first round. At this point, everybody's predicting that they go in the first 8 picks, which I think is also probably likely right now because there may be another trade or two. But I think it just plays to the Bears' advantage. I'm assuming a lot of our listeners are Bears fans, and it's going to leave some really good football players available at 9. It's going to leave some really good football players, available longer than we would expect, and the Bears could possibly make another trade, maybe even add another future number 1, or at least add 2s and 3s and still get the player they want. So obviously we have to wait for these two stories. The Rodgers story isn't going to have any impact on the Bears. That's not going to impact the draft, all that much. But if Lamar Jackson were to get dealt, that would move a lot of draft picks around, Sean, and it could impact what the Bears decide to do.
Yeah, it absolutely could. And the sort of undercurrent to that whole Lamar Jackson conversation as we're kind of reacting to this live, it just went up. He just tweeted it out a few minutes ago that he wants to be traded. That also kind of tells you that there isn't a team that's been willing to meet his negotiation, what he's asking for, because he's had the ability to talk with teams, and now obviously trading two first round picks would be what any team would have to do in this franchise tag scenario, and that's a lot to ask. But it kind of seems like Lamar is, this is kind of the last thing he has in his back pocket is say, okay, I want to be traded. I don't know what else at this point he can do other than sit out the season.
Kyle, if I could just jump back real quick, I just want to say that's a great point by Sean. Normally we can figure these things out. We know maybe one side, the team or the player, is being unreasonable. It sounds to me like Lamar Jackson has some unrealistic demands because, I think there's a lot of teams that would want a franchise quarterback. This shouldn't be that hard to do. And he's got to be asking for too much money. And he just may need some time to figure out he's not going to get what he wants, but 150, 160 million over the next 4 or 5 years should be enough. So that's probably what's going wrong with that pack, or else he'd be re-signed already without being traded.
I don't think I've seen specifics or even really firm rumors in terms of the exact money Lamar Jackson's looking for. I do feel like I've seen some talk of the guarantees and wanting a large portion of that money guaranteed. And considering what we saw happen with Deshaun Watson in Cleveland with getting all of that money, and once he was able to get on the field this year, looked very, very rusty Hub, do you think the way Deshaun Watson performed could have an impact on Lamar Jackson asking for the type of guarantees that it's at least rumored that he's looking for?
Well, it certainly could have an impact, and it would make sense. Listen, I cannot fault this young man for wanting guarantees. What are contracts for if they're not guaranteed? And that's something that's kind of unique to football more than other sports. And in other sports, most of these deals are guaranteed, not all of them, but big chunks of it. And I understand why that's a problem. But you have to negotiate with what is going on in your business, in your sport, in the NFL, and these deals are just not all guaranteed. And I don't know who his agent is. I'm not saying his agent's doing a bad job, but they have to understand what the market is, and whether it's a question of the guarantees and whether it's fair or not isn't the issue. The market is telling them we're only going to guarantee so much, and him and his agent have to get used to that. They have to decide either want to stay where they are or try and force the trade.
Well, he doesn't have an agent, which is part of the problem. He's doing this the way Roquan Smith did it. And, we if we take him at face value based on what Lamar himself has tweeted, he turned down the 3 years, 133 guarantee. So, I mean, I think it's probably, I imagine he wants more, a couple more years tacked on to some sort of deal like that is what I would think he's looking for.
Mark checking in this morning says Lamar Jackson to the Lions.
That would impact the Bears.
Yeah, that would be a fun one. It's funny that Mark says that, because I was at some point this morning, I was trying to go through my head and figure out how I think the NFC North is starting to shake up. And I don't know if we talked about this on air or off air, but I had mentioned about Detroit being a betting favorite in Vegas currently in the North, and I found it odd because the Vikings coming off a strong year and a team that I think is better than the Lions. But I like what I've seen out of Detroit. But I keep going, I know Jared Goff got the Rams to one Super Bowl, but I don't feel very comfortable with Jared Goff at quarterback. Do you think Lamar Jackson would be in play for Detroit?
I think it's a possibility. The question is, do the Lions think they're ready now? Do they think with the improved play the second half of last season and where they're at with a move like that, can that make them a contender, or do they need more pieces? They've already made a couple trades. They've got plenty of assets to deal with. So I wouldn't be happy if I was a Bears fan and they got Lamar Jackson. I don't think that would be good for them. But these teams can't worry about that. They got to fix themselves. What happens to the other teams? They still got to beat them no matter who they are. So I think it could be a very interesting move and suggestion and thought for the Lions. How it impacts the Bears, who knows?
I would be a little surprised. I just feel like coming off a good year last year for Jared Goff, I could see them giving him one more season at the helm of this offense, and maybe then you start to look towards the next thing. But obviously, I don't really know what they're thinking.
All right, well, so that's a good place to dive into the draft here. But before we do, want to first say, if you're watching on YouTube, do us a favor, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment if you're watching this later. We really appreciate it. It helps people find the show, helps grow the channel. Outside of that, make sure you're following us on Twitter at Kyle Nabors, at Sean_Hammond, at Hub_Arkush. You can go to shawlocal.com to find all of our content. Make sure if you listen to this in the podcast form, it's available on iTunes, on Spotify, on pretty much any device you can get it on, or any app that you can find it on. It should be there for you nowadays. But as I was saying to start, it's looking pretty likely that 3, if not 4 quarterbacks are going to be going before the Bears at number 9. I start to look at this board, Hub, and not surprisingly, this really, you got the 4 quarterbacks. I feel Will Anderson is pretty much a lock to go in that top 8. There's 5 guys right there. And then you start putting in someone like Jalen Carter, who most people would consider to be a top 10 talent. I shouldn't say. I'm pretty confident everyone considers Jalen Carter to be a top 10 talent. It's just going to be how people value him. What I'm saying is, and as you said earlier, there are going to be quality names for Ryan Poles available at number 9. It's becoming pretty apparent.
Yeah, well, there's no question about that. I mean, it looks like a pretty good draft. It is loaded with pass rushers. There are a lot of good wide receivers, although I think most would say that's not a huge need for the Bears at this point. They still can use more. It's very good at cornerback, interestingly enough. And I think the Bears have got some interesting young corners right now. And of course, the offensive line, the offensive tackles. You know, some people have got 5 or 6 of them going in the top 30 to 40 picks. And so things that the Bears need are very deep in talent. There's no question about that. I have 2 players who shouldn't be available, who I think are going to be available, and who I think could be the 2 best players in this draft. And one of them, I guess, would be a little surprise to a lot of people. I think Jalen Carter is going to slip a little deeper than anybody realizes. Again, with these quarterbacks, with these pass rushers, do you want to take that chance? Because we haven't learned any more about what's going to happen with Jalen Carter, with him being indicted. Is there going to be a trial? Probably not for a year. Who knows, what's going to go on there.
Well, I will say he pled guilty to the charges.
Mm-hmm.
So there shouldn't be a trial or anything like that. I'm pretty sure he's going to be free and clear.
I think the issue, Kyle, is he pled guilty to the charges because they're misdemeanors. And,
right.
And there's no reason not to believe. The question is more coming? Because they were still investigating this. I think teams are worried about finding out more about him. So it's not so much they're worried about him going to jail, obviously, but I think it's learning more about who he is. But that I could be wrong on that one. He could very well go at 6, at 4. He should go at 1. He's not going to. The real issue is how many teams are willing to overpay for a quarterback. Because these 4 quarterbacks are all first-round picks, and they're all good prospects. But I don't think any of them is good enough to be the number 1 overall pick. And I don't think more than 2 of them should go in the top 6 or 7. They're going to. We know that. So at any rate, you've now got the Bears looking at probably the next best edge rusher, maybe the next best cornerback, the best offensive tackle. But to me, there's a player who's evolved. And I wrote about this the other day, last Tuesday. If you haven't read it, I would assume it's still there online. And I know it will surprise some people. But I think that one of the 2 best players in this draft is going to be Bijan Robinson. And I don't think the Bears are set at running back. They've now, brought in another free agent. They've still got, a couple of decent running backs. But Bijan Robinson is starting to look to me like a potential, Pro Bowl running back. And I don't care how they're playing the game in the NFL these days. When you can get a guy like that, particularly at number 9, I think you have to. And so I think it's something that people need to start thinking about, because Ryan Poles has said consistently he's going to get the best players. That's what he should do. That's the way you succeed in the draft. And I think it would be one more interesting big story if the Bears were to do it. I've now noticed that a couple of the other, quote, draft experts, the guys who put these boards together, are saying the same thing, because it makes sense. And it's not something that anybody's talked about much, but I think it's something we should start to think about.
Oh, there's Sean. I'll let you start.
Well, yeah, I mean, Ryan Poles does say he wants to get the best players, but he also is very clear that, the value is important to him. And I just, he wants to get the best players for the right value. He wouldn't necessarily say this. I personally believe that would not be a pick that Ryan Poles would go for, because everything we've seen has sort of indicated that he kind of thinks these running backs are replaceable. And while Bijan Robinson might be the absolute, best running back in this class, he could be a stud. He could very well be a Pro Bowler, like Hub's saying. I don't see that being a pick that Ryan Poles wants to use at number 9 when they have so many issues on the both sides on the interior. You have a chance to get a really good tackle or a really good pass rusher. And I think that's more of a long-term play, because with these running backs, you don't always know, some of these guys, you get injured and your career ends in 3 years. It's a really tough position to take so high. And we've seen that over the years as fewer and fewer running backs go in the first round.
And Sean, I think everything you said is absolutely true, but there's one piece of it that I just want to add. is the best player. And I think that Bijan Robinson at number 9 is a steal. I think he is probably one of the 2 best prospects in this draft. And if Ryan Poles were to agree with that, you should always take the best player available in the draft. That's what makes it work. That's what's got me thinking about this. I don't disagree with anything you just said, but that aspect is important, and I hope that's something that Ryan Poles agrees with, that you always take the best player available. The problem is we don't know what kind of NFL players these guys are going to be until after you've taken them and you know if they stay healthy and you know if they develop the way you expect them to.
I love Bijan Robinson, like an unhealthy amount. My favorite running back coming out of the draft since Saquon, and Saquon was taken 2nd overall. It was a rare time where, well, I mean, I didn't love that the Giants did it just because I felt they were drafting a running back when they still had a lot of question marks on that team. Now, I think part of this goes to how comfortable Ryan Poles is where they're at in the rebuild. You know, if he thinks Justin Fields, if he's leaning that way, I think going for someone like Bijan Robinson at 9 makes a lot of sense. I also think Robinson, with the way this board is going to shake out, I think Ryan Poles is in a really good spot to be able to trade down here, guys. And that's not surprising as we talk about, but you start looking like those 4 quarterbacks gone. Let's say Will Anderson's gone off the board. Let's say Tyree Wilson's gone off the board, which I think is a very, very realistic scenario. They've traded for DJ Moore. Those top 2 receivers, the kid out of Ohio State, Najiba, Quentin Johnson out of TCU. Like, those are guys that I like, but I don't think those are areas of need at number 9 for the Bears. Like, everything kind of seems to line up where they might be able to trade down, into the mid-teens to late teens, and Bijan Robinson might still be there. But I don't have a problem if they were to take him at 9, considering where they're at. The other thing there that I'm thinking about too is you start looking at offensive tackle, which is where the Bears really need help. The top rated guy there, most people board, Peter Skoronski out of Maine South and Northwestern. Really short in the arms, might end up at guard rather than tackle. Like, I don't know if there's someone that's going to be available at number 9 for the Bears with how this board is setting up outside of Robinson that doesn't provide, there's going to be enough value to trade down, I feel like, unless you decide to take best player available for a guy like Robinson, Hub.
Honestly, there's only 2 positions that I can see them drafting at number 9, which is defensive line or offensive line. And then the third option is, do you take the best player available? And so now the question is Robinson a blue player on his board? Do they agree that he could be the best player available? Could another linebacker be the best player available? They're not going to take a linebacker at number 9, obviously, with what they've done in free agency. But these are the decisions they have to make. And what's intriguing to me about Robinson also, how much better does he make Justin Fields immediately? How much better of a quarterback does Justin Fields become with one of the best running backs in the NFL? The fact, if he becomes that, the fact is that they were number 1 in the league running the football this year because of Justin Fields, and you can't maintain that. That's not going to happen again next year, the year after, and you also can't keep your quarterback healthy with him doing that. So if you do believe that Justin Fields is your franchise quarterback, then you better get somebody to take over the running game for him. And I think, again, with adding, the trade for Moore, and fixing the wide receiver position, if you get a great running back, I don't think offensive linemen are that hard to find. And if you go back and you look at the history of the draft, most of these guys don't come in the first round. And a lot of first-round offensive linemen don't pan out. That's what makes me nervous about all this conversation about them taking Skoronski or anybody, an offensive lineman at number 9. I just wouldn't do it. I would definitely take a pass rusher at number 9 if that guy is still there. But I just am not sure the way the Bears board is going to look based on what we've heard so far from Ryan Poles.
I don't know if you guys read what Peter King wrote after the Bears trade. It might have just come out last week. I can't remember exactly. But he caught up with Ryan Poles, and Poles was talking about, there was a little nugget in there about how there was the potential to trade down twice with Houston at number 2 and then with Carolina at number 9 and potentially wind up with 3 first-round picks next year. And when I read that, obviously that didn't pan out. That's not what happened. Houston had other ideas. So that really didn't work out. But, I read that and I think that's still absolutely on the table. Yeah, if there's a team that's say in the late teens or early 20s and they want to move up to number 9, you can absolutely wind up with a third number 1 pick next year. And so Kyle, I agree that there's that possibility that they trade down again. And it may be a scenario where you have to see what shakes out on draft night. You're talking about 8 teams ahead of you. There's a lot of different scenarios that could play out there. But that's certainly still on the table. And I think Ryan Poles does value the possibility of adding more future first round picks.
Rico checking in here. I think this is a good question. Rico says, here is my thing. What are teams trading up for? No QB, no Carter, no Anderson. I mean, teams can sit and wait.
I mean, we had teams trading up for wide receivers last year. I know it's a different class. There's different. Obviously, there were a lot more highly touted receivers in last year's first round. But I mean, if guys want to go get anybody, they're going to do it.
Guys, yeah, there's no question about that. I think the really interesting key here to the Bears trading that 9th pick is Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud and Anthony. And they're going in the top 4, top 5, top 6. I'm not sure at all about Will Levis. That's the pick, and I think he may be sitting there at 9. Probably not because he's a really good prospect, but there are a lot more question marks with him. And if 2 teams take a pass rusher, the 3 quarterbacks are gone. Carter goes. If Levis is sitting there at number 9, then yes, the Bears can get another number 1 pick. Beyond that, I'm not sure what that trade would look like. I think that trade would look like going down 3, 4, 5, 6 spots and maybe getting a couple 2s or a 2 and a 3. I don't know if you get another number 1, and that's where this becomes a little trickier. Now, a couple 2s would be a nice thing to get for that, to go down 3 or 4 spots and still get a really good player. So I would definitely do it. But if we're talking about adding a third number 1 next year, I think that's gotten pretty tough now, sitting there at 9, depending on what somebody would be trading for.
Yeah, that's the thing about that scenario is you got to move down 9, 10 spots to or look at it from the other perspective. You got to be moving up that far if you're going to give up your number 1 pick, and certainly there's no guarantee that that's going to play out.
Where do you guys want to go from here? Like, how should we? There's just when you start going into the draft, and because it's not, we can talk Bears all we want, but you have to kind of try and figure out what other teams are going to do when we're discussing this here. When we start looking at those teams that are picking in the teens, are there any teams that you guys feel will be desperate enough to potentially come up and get that quarterback like a Will Levis?
Yeah, I mean, we know that there are teams after number 9 that want a quarterback. The question is, how much do they like Levis? I'll tell you something else that is interesting. The Bears could very well end up trading the number 9 pick to a team that wants Bijan Robinson, because I think he's that kind of football player. And yeah, there are bigger question marks that come with right. That was the other half. It was Kyle's suggestion, and it was a good one that I wrote about the other day, is what's happened to the running back position. It's the combination of the NFL becoming a passing league, which it definitely is right now. Not that running backs aren't still important. There is the injury concerns at the position, but those concerns you also still have at quarterback. And I think they're even bigger at quarterback, and that's not stopping anybody. So, it may be that the most valuable player on the board at number 9 that could allow the Bears to move could be Bijan Robinson, and know that maybe Poles doesn't take a running back, but maybe he trades the pick so somebody else can. And that opens up everybody else on the board. That doesn't limit it to a team that is just looking, for a quarterback. If no offensive tackles have gone in the first 8 picks, and there's a good chance they won't, I think there's definitely a team out there that would say, yeah, I'm going to trade for that pick to get the best offensive lineman in the draft. And if, you've only got 1 or 2 edge rushers off the board, that's what starts to value this pick a lot. And almost any team drafting 10 through 31 could want an offensive lineman or a pass rusher. So I guess my point is, there are going to be plenty of trade options for the Bears. It's dependent on how much somebody's willing to offer and how much they feel they have to get to make it worth passing whoever the best player on the board is.
Yeah, because you're right, Hub. In those scenarios, I mean, they're going to be faced with a decision because obviously, if you're talking about the best pass rusher, the best tackle, those are positions that the Bears need, and so maybe they would just feel content to get take whoever's available in that spot. Kyle, to go back to your original question, if we're talking like teams that are quarterback needy behind the Bears, I'm just looking at the draft order here. Tennessee at number 11, maybe. Washington at number 16. You could say Detroit at number 18. Tampa Bay at number 19. Those are kind of the ones that stand out. Once you get into those playoff teams, it's a little tougher.
Detroit coming up from number 18 and trading with the Bears would be an amusing an amusing wrinkle that I don't expect. Tennessee,
I wouldn't expect it. No,
Tennessee at 11 seems to make a lot of sense. Washington,
it does. You could argue that they could probably just stand pat. They got the Eagles in front of them. They could probably just stand pat and wait for that guy to fall to them. But I don't know if the Bears say they got somebody on the phone who's willing to take number 9, maybe not.
Yeah, that's the thing, because then you're looking at a team could trade up to number 9 or number 10. If you're at number
that's
11
true
like
too,
Tennessee.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Shorty has a question for you, Hub. But before we get that, I'm gonna throw up Mike B checking in with saying Houston could be sneaky and take Will Anderson at number 2 and then trade up from their number 12 to the Bears at number 9. That's I do want to go through a scenario though. Do you think there is any chance, Hub, that Will Anderson could go to Houston at number 2? Or do you think they're 100% chance, like they just have to take the quarterback there?
I think there's a very good chance Will Anderson could go at number 2. I think he probably should go at number 2 because I think he is the other player along with Robinson, who I'm saying are the 2 best players in this draft. And having the 12th pick, and being able to trade that pick, which they could, to come up and get the quarterback, it makes perfect sense. You've got a bit of an unknown. Unknown is fair. I'm not saying a bad general manager or a good general manager, but somebody who hasn't done a lot of this, making those deals, and so that would make it interesting too. But guys, everything's on the board. I think that the other thing we got to be careful with this Bears conversation though is that you got to realize if they're trading that number 9 pick, what they want isn't one number 1; it's 2 number 1s. They got to get this year's number 1 and next year's number 1. They're not trading that pick to get next year's number 1 from somebody and go out of the first round, no matter what else they get. I wouldn't think. So, if you're talking about a team 2 spots behind them, 4 spots, but that's not going to happen. It's going to have to be somebody who's sitting down at 16 or 19 to make a deal like that. And it's not out of the question. But that's really where you want to focus who that team might be.
All right, let me see if I can go back to Mr. Shorty. Yeah, here it is. A question for Hub. I believe he was talking about Jalen Carter, not Andre Carter. Does Jalen Carter's character fit the Bears organization? Hub, have you heard anything in terms of how the Bears are evaluating Jalen Carter?
Not really. I mean, teams are pretty, secretive about that. But I think the better answer to the question is the signing of DeMarcus Walker. I mean, you've now gone out and committed significantly in free agency for a defensive tackle. Carter is not an outside pass rusher. He's a pretty good pass rusher. He's a great football player. He fits in the top 6. But when you start talking now about the Bears' need, it's on the offensive side, it's offensive line. If the Bears take an offensive lineman at any position, everybody's going to say, yeah, that makes sense. On the defensive line side, you're talking edge rusher. You're not talking about let's go get another defensive tackle, and that's who Jalen Carter is. Now, if he's that good a football player, then you got to do it. It makes perfect sense. But I don't know that Jalen Carter fits the Bears the way he could fit a number of other teams at 5, 6, or 9. And so that's why. Plus, there's also the question marks. We know, I think that if they go on the line, they're going Skoronski. I mean, Poles, we know what he's done with getting local guys, and the fact that a local guy is the best player at that position, then that's, I think, a pretty easy prediction to make. I just think it's too rich for him, but that's me. That's not somebody who's smarter than me about it.
I personally feel like the Jalen Carter thing is just not worth the headache. He may wind up having a nice career and playing well in the NFL, but I would be okay with letting that be somewhere else. If you're worried about the character issues and the off the field stuff, I mean, I just don't think it's worth it. But we know that NFL teams, they're going to do what they think they got to do to win football games, and the Bears, they can talk about how they want, XYZ high character guys, whatever. This is a Bears team that had what, Kyle, like 3 guys arrested last summer. So, you can talk all you want about that type of stuff, but at the end of the day, some NFL team is going to not care and they're going to take him. And that could be the Bears. Personally, I wouldn't do it though.
There's one other real big point here about Carter, guys. He's 22, I think. I don't know the young man. I'd rather believe he's not a bad guy. And we have no reason to say that he is, but what we do know is that what he was doing that night was really stupid, and I don't know how mature, how grown up he is. I don't know, how much work he has to do to become the person that he wants to be. I think there's a very good chance he could come, develop into a Pro Bowler and also a great, person in his town, in his city. He could become, legendary in a lot of different ways. But what he was doing was so stupid. And so I think when we talk about these investments, not investments, but, getting to know these guys, you're not talking about whether he broke the law. You're talking about how mature he is right now, how much growing he still has to do. And that's a very hard thing to predict. And that's why he's going to drop in the draft, not because he got arrested and pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Hub, too, because, you go back, it's not so much the misdemeanors. Obviously, that's not good. But, if you were to believe what the Atlanta Journal-Constitution reported, it's the fact that he allegedly left the scene where his friends were, dying and in need. And that's the big question mark when you're talking about this situation. For me, more so even than the reckless driving or whatever the charges were.
Well, and also just to add one more thing, the way he's handled it since, not leaving, and then everything he did since, it was denied for a while. I thought, he, I believe, does have an agent. And I thought the statement that he gave at the combine before he came made things worse. I'm completely innocent. None of this stuff happened. No, it happened. There's a couple people who died because of this, and you did do something wrong. Everything that's happened with this kid makes him not a bad person, but definitely a question mark, probably not worth risking the number 6 or the number 9 pick on.
I tend to lean towards saying that the Bears, he's such a talented player, it's worth that risk. We talked about that last time we did the podcast a little bit. I do want to bring up, you talk about a local kid in Peter Skoronski, another name that will probably be available there at number 9, and also would be a defensive lineman, another local kid, Lucas Van Ness out of Barrington, played at Iowa, coming off a huge year. I don't know how much you guys have digged into the tape on Van Ness yet, but reading through, it seems like there's a pretty raw player still developing. Do you see him as someone who's going to end up outside? I've seen some talk of him potentially being a guy that could end up being a 3 technique.
Yeah, I mean, my answer on Van Ness is real simple. I think he's a first-round pick. I think he's a good football player. I haven't seen a great football player yet. I don't think he's good enough to go at number 9. Now, here's another guy. If you trade down, let's say you end up down at 15 or 20 and you get a bunch more picks and you take him, then that could be very interesting. But I just think number 9 is too rich for him.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to be a top 10 pick, but I think that's why what you're saying, Kyle, is what has a lot of football people intrigued, is that he relatively, compared to some of his peers in this draft, he has not played a lot of football. He technically never started a game at Iowa. He played both defensive tackle and outside at defensive end with Iowa. And so, this is kind of a guy that you can, if you're a GM, if you're a scout, you look at that and you say, you can shape him into almost whatever you want him to be, whether you want him to be a 3 technique, whether you want to keep him outside, whether you want him to do a little bit of both. And I think that's where the value with Lucas Van Ness comes from, is that there's so many possibilities for what you can do with him.
Sean just answered your question for you, though, Kyle, is that, again, could be a great football player. I got no problem with the Bears taking him. But how do you draft a guy at number 9 who never started a game in college? I mean, it's just about value. And it's about, at that pick, it's too rich. Now, if they trade down and take him, it could be very interesting.
I was telling Sean about this on Friday, I believe it was, because we were talking about putting together a story. Funny thing is, Lucas Van Ness's father, it was actually my chiropractor, Hub, from there. They own a shop in there. And I remember when Lucas signed with Iowa, and, he was a good player in high school, figured he'd be okay out there at the Big Ten. But I remember thinking to myself, like, he'll have a nice little career out there. Never in my wildest dreams did I think we'd be talking about Lucas Van Ness as a potential top 10 pick, and definitely a first round pick. Just one of those examples of what happens when you take young athletic guys. Like Lucas was a kid that had the body type, but had to fill out. And interesting to see when you go from an 18-year-old kid and then 3 years, I believe 4 years, maybe in a Big Ten program, to see how quickly these guys develop.
Kyle, there's I talked with Barrington coach Joe Sanchez last week, and not to give any spoilers for my story, that's still in the works. We got a little time yet, so keep your eyes peeled for that, guys. But just one little nugget I want to share. He said that Lucas came back because Lucas's brother is still at Barrington on the football team, and so Lucas came back last fall during his bye week, and they got to catch up. They were talking football, talking mostly about Iowa, and Joe was like, there was no talk of the NFL. This was just 6 months ago. Like Lucas has blown up so much in just the last couple of months that when they, met and sat down and chatted for a little bit, that wasn't even on their radar 6 months ago. And that's how fast this guy has risen up these ranks. And it's a pretty incredible story.
All right. First of all, I hate that Sean is working on stories a week and a half in advance. I usually start about an hour and a half before my deadline. But more important, let's talk about the good stuff about Van Ness. I wasn't trying to be negative, by jumping into that thing about him never starting so much as just pointing out what the evaluators are looking at. But the positive side is that he has the size and the athleticism to play any position on the defensive line. He could very well end up as an edge rusher. He could very well end up as a 3 technique. We don't know. And he got better literally every week. The more he got on the field, the more plays he made. That's how he's evolved into this conversation. And so when you find players like that who are still developing and you don't know how high the ceiling could be, that's, where the really good GMs or drafters, make their living. And so he could be a great pick for the Bears, just not at number 9.
Those guys make a living on those picks, and it's also the type of pick that costs people their jobs.
Mm-hmm.
It's Lucas Van Ness is such an intriguing prospect, and I can't wait to see how it plays out over the next month, because he is a guy that I could see sneak into the top 10. He's a guy that it could be one of those situations where it's getting into the late 20s and people are starting to wonder, when's someone going to come up and get him. So a large, to me, it's a big gap for where he could end up. Mr. Shorty had said a Hubba lambasted me for my David Bell love last year. Who is the guy that you were pounding the table for most, Hub, besides Bijan Robinson?
I'm trying to remember my lambast. I can't. But Robinson, to me, it's become a thing in the last week or so. I went back and watched some tape and kind of got a feel for how good, I think this kid may be. And I know this is probably not smart, but I keep thinking Walter Payton. I keep thinking Gale Sayers. I keep thinking about Bears running backs. And that's why Bijan Robinson is the kid that I've kind of fallen in love with. But I look at these edge rushers. It's interesting because Trey Wilson he was, 3-4 weeks ago, he was sitting at, 16 to 30 on a lot of these draft boards, and now he's suddenly sitting in the top 6. You look at Lucas Van Ness, you look at Miles Murphy, the kid from Clemson, who I've seen in the second round. I've seen it at 12. These edge rushers, there's a bunch of them, and so and of course Van Ness, who belongs in that first round conversation. The other kid who I have been in love with ever since the college football season ended was the Texas Christian receiver, and he has dropped down boards for some reason instead of dropping up. But I just don't see the Bears drafting a wide receiver in the first round, not after making the trade for the first round pick.
I love Quentin Johnson, Sean, but I have a hard time. I agree with Hub. I have a hard time seeing the Bears taking a wide receiver at number 9 after the DJ Moore trade.
Yeah, and even if they were to trade down to say the early 20s, he would probably be there, maybe. But
I don't think he'd be there in the
maybe
20s.
Not. I don't know.
I think him and
Jordan.
The other kid.
Jordan Addison.
No, I think Jordan Addison might be there. The kid from Ohio State.
Jackson Smith and Jigba. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think him and Johnson are going to be off the board probably by 15 or 16.
I
do tend to think that too.
Guys, I got to tell you, I don't mean to interrupt. I'm sorry.
No, that's good.
Addison is flying up some boards. He is.
I've seen him high on some.
Yeah, well,
really
because he is arguably the fastest wide receiver in the draft. He's got good but not special size. He was a transfer who didn't play as well his senior year as he did his junior or whatever year he was, but 2 years ago as opposed to last year. And what the Bears don't have is great speed at the position. They've got really good size at the position, but I don't know that they have that game breaker. Now, I don't know how you make room for all these guys if you're keeping them all, but if they were to trade down, 15, 17, 19, I think Addison could be there at that spot. And much like I'm saying about running backs, if he's the best player at the spot, then that's what you got to take.
Mike B, check it in with the all caps, Jordan Addison, the next Antonio Brown without the character concerns. And he had followed it up with also similar to Garrett Wilson. I like the comparison to Garrett Wilson, and Mike Johnson had followed this up here with when was the last time the Bears hit with a wide receiver in the first round? And obviously you had the Kevin White with that 2014, I want to say. Seems like that was about right. Maybe not that long ago.
Be right, yeah.
2014 might have been too long ago. But anyway, how many times have the Bears drafted a wide receiver in the first round?
Kyle, 2015.
Like, I don't think there's been a lot of picks in the first round at the wide receiver position for the Bears over the last, 20 years or so.
I mean, I think Kevin White might be the only one in certainly the last 10 to 15 years.
Alshon was a second rounder, right? Or a third, maybe even?
Yeah, guys. But I think what the point here is that Ryan Poles is 38? This is his second draft. It's his second year as a GM. What the Bears have done in the draft, in prior years is kind of irrelevant.
It is irrelevant. Sure.
I mean, he has already, developed a plan, getting local kids, piling up picks. I understand the question. I'm not trying to make light of the question. And the Bears haven't had a lot. The Bears have never had a great passing game. I mean, they haven't had a quarterback. How could they have wide receivers? I mean, that's the history of the football team. But I don't think that we can help you with any good predictions about what they're going to do this year based on what they had done in prior years, because this is as much learning about Ryan Poles as it is learning about these draft picks.
Hub, you mentioned earlier about cornerbacks. And so obviously the Bears have spent some draft capital in recent years in Jalen Johnson and Kyler Gordon. I'd say it's a position they still need to get better at. There are at least three cornerbacks that look like they're going to be first round picks. And I'll start with this. I knew he was in this draft, but I kind of forgotten about it. Coming across Joey Porter Jr. and then realizing exactly who Joey Porter Jr. was. That was an instance this morning of feeling very old, guys. I don't know about you, but Now we're starting to talk about the kids of players that I saw in high school. Like Joey Porter was one of my favorite players when I was in high school, and now his kid's about to get drafted. I'm really starting to feel old at that point, Sean.
Hey, I'm right there with you. There's Marvin Harrison Jr. next year. There's another one. They keep coming.
I'm just trying to figure out how I'm supposed to feel about you guys feeling old. Guys, and I apologize because I don't know where he played his high school ball, but Devon Witherspoon from Illinois, I see in a lot of mock drafts going before number 9. I mean, he is the best wide receiver prospect, not wide receiver, I'm sorry, cornerback prospect in this draft. And if he were to fall to number 9 with what people think of him, and again, he's your best player, it wouldn't be stunning. But I can't make up my mind which would be more unlikely. If he went ahead of number 9, although I'm seeing that on several of these mock drafts, he is the best cornerback. Cornerback is a value position. There are a lot of them this year, but he played his ball at Illinois. And how unusual would it be for Illinois to have a top 10 pick in the first round?
Gosh, it would be a long time. I'd have to think about that one. But I like Devin Witherspoon. As an Illini myself, fan of what he was doing last season for Illinois, and he's a small dude. He's not like huge for the position, but I mean he's certainly in that conversation to be the first cornerback off the board.
You talking about his size? I mean, I think he is worthy of the number 9 pick. Or I'm not saying the Bears should select him, but I do think what I'm saying there is I think he's worthy of being around that top 10 draft status. We saw last year that the Bears liked to, when they were in their nickel package, which they run pretty often, that Kyler Gordon slid inside in that scenario. Does Devin Witherspoon have the size, Sean, to line up consistently outside if they were to make that decision and draft Witherspoon?
I mean, I think this guy can play wherever the heck you want him to play. I do think I think the Bears like what they've seen from Kyler Gordon playing on that inside, and so I do think that is they're going to keep pursuing that because he's come in here and was able to do that at a pretty high level for a rookie. But I mean, he's a little, Witherspoon is skinny, and that's certainly something that you get in an NFL weight room and with NFL nutritionists and all that. He could certainly put on a little weight if that's what they want to do with him. But he has some nice length, but he's a skinny dude.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Sean. Because I was going to say, I don't think his size is that big an issue with a lot of scouts because he's not short. I mean, he I think is 6 foot, maybe even 6'1".
I think so, yeah.
And that's what you're looking for. They can put 10, 15 pounds of strength on him. I don't think they're worried about that at all. I'm not talking about when I say they, I mean agents. I don't mean the Bears. Not draft expert.
The chat kind of following up with what you guys saying. Witherspoon is a bit more slender, but he's tall enough with long limbs and the big hitter. And then Vince following it up. Witherspoon is a stud, not the biggest guy, but has the confidence and swagger needed to excel. It definitely would be. You look at the way that the Bears started building their team last year in the secondary with Jaquan Brisker and Kyler Gordon. Certainly taking a swing at a cornerback there. That would be a hell of a secondary, guys.
It would be. You wonder too, I think in the back of their minds, they got to be thinking about whether, I don't know, would Ryan Poles, do they want to extend Jalen Johnson or would they want to give themselves another option if they a few months from now decide that they don't want to do that?
We're getting a lot of questions about fits, guys, and I think that reality is the advantage to being where the Bears are at right now, even though it's a disadvantage, is that there is no position that they could draft at number 9 where people would be unhappy. There isn't a position on the Bears roster where it would be too much, where they're so good that they couldn't afford to get somebody better. And so I don't think if you get the best cornerback in the draft, at number 9, you find a way to make room for him.
You can't complain about that. Yeah.
That's not a problem.
I think that's a really good point, because you look at the way Ryan Poles has gone about this offseason, and Hub, you and I talked about it a little bit on Friday. I think, Sean, you agree with, I really like the way the Bears approach free agency, not just free agency, but when you got DJ Moore in that trade, you look at guys like Donta Foreman, Robert Tanya, like these weren't big signings, but the Bears and Ryan Poles, they created some depth here on this roster that we haven't seen in a couple of years. And that's not to say that they're ready to be a contender next year. But as you were guys both alluding to there, it gave them so much more flexibility at number 9 going into this draft. I really feel, whether that is taking best player available, whether that's trading down, whether that's deciding, we need that edge rusher or offensive tackle. There are so many possibilities for Ryan Poles at number 9, a month ahead of this draft, that it almost makes our job more difficult, because we can't really eliminate any scenario here. Like when we're trying to do our draft preparation, we really got to be on our toes for that first night, because I have zero idea how this is going to go for the Bears.
That's where I look at this Bijan Robinson love affair that I've fallen into. And the thing that, suggests to me that it's the most unlikely is the fact that they signed, the free agent running back who rushed for 900 yards with Carolina last year. I mean, no, he's not going to be the next great running back, but it's not like they don't have guys who can play the position. I think that, the kid who played they've got some talent there. There's no question about that. But that's where you have to take a step back and say, now, wait a minute, we're building a contender. We want the best we can get everywhere. And so regardless of the position, even at running back, if you can get the next best running back in the NFL or one of the next best, 2 or 3, you do it.
Yeah, I like the combination of Donta Foreman and Khalil Herbert. I think they've given themselves 2 really good options. And Foreman's a guy who he's kind of been in that journeyman role for a little bit and wasn't really finding a spot until recently. And so, maybe there's more in the tank there. We saw what he did the second half of last season. If you give him a full year and he can stay healthy, maybe he will wind up being a really good running back for you. And Kyle, I think you mentioned Tunyon. I think that's a clear upgrade for their second tight end spot. I mean, they didn't really have anybody who could catch the football consistently other than Cole Kmet at that spot. And I think Tunyon can do that, and he's shown that he can do that.
I would add one thing about Foreman, though, guys. He got 1 year, $2.5 million. I mean, that doesn't stop you from doing anything.
That's expendable. Absolutely.
That was clear. The move was not made because they believed he was the future. The move was made to give him somebody who could do things this year while they were fixing other things.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I could go on for quite a while about Donta Foreman. I love the kid. I'm happy to see him finally break out last year in Carolina. He's had some terrible injury luck his first few seasons in the NFL. It was a great signing. But yeah, as you guys pointed out, 2.5 or 3 million, not going to preclude the Bears from doing anything else. But all right, we're just coming up here on an hour. We got a lot of time to talk about the draft over the next month. So let's get out of here. But before we do, I guess, Sean, Hub, I'll let you guys kind of wrap it up on some final thoughts on what we talked about today. Sean, how about you first?
I mean, certainly, the Bears are in a good position. Going back to what we were talking about at the top, if those 4 quarterbacks go ahead of them, I mean, they're going to have a chance to get a really good football player, whatever position they want that to be. And so, they're sitting in a good spot there at number 9. We spent a lot of time talking about trade scenarios, but I still think it's most likely that they stand pat and get a really good player and, address the tackle spot, address the pass rusher spot. But, certainly trading is still on the table as well.
Guys, one of the keys to Ryan Poles' rebuild, maybe even the most important thing, has been to add young talent. And so there's no way that the Bears can end up with too many draft choices and make a few more trades. But I would say this, they've already got 10 picks in this draft.
They do.
I think unless you're getting another number 1 or more number 2s, then you're more interested. This is your one chance, even picking it, not your one chance, but it's a good chance picking at number 9. With 4 of the top, 63 picks in the draft, to get your future right now. So I think maybe, a trade at number 9, if it yields, 2 number ones, another number 1 next year, is something that they have to look at. Anything short of that, there are going to be some really good football players available with all 4 of those first picks. And so I think it's what the most interesting part is, the part we know the least about with any of the 32 teams, including the Bears, is what their draft board looks like right now, where they've got these players ranked, if they think the same thing of these guys as we do. And we're not pros at this. But I think there is a reasonable chance that the Bears trade that 9th pick, depending on who's there when they pick. But as far as the 2 2s, and the 3, they're going to make picks there. And there's going to be some very good football players available. And that's where you start taking the best player available at a position that you think is your greatest need. And that's why I think they can wait on the offensive line until the 2nd round. I think they can wait on the secondary until the 2nd round. I don't know if you can wait for an edge rusher, because you're looking for a Pro Bowler there. You're looking for a 14 sack guy. And so to me, edge rusher continues to be the main focus for that first pick, depending on where they make it.
All right, guys. Well, let's go ahead and get out of here. That's a good time to go ahead and say, make sure you go over to shawlocal.com. Hub has a full column up right now about Bijan Robinson and his feelings about the way the running back position has kind of changed across the NFL. Sean, you got a piece up looking at the Bears' greatest positions of needs. Now that we're post-free agency, we'll have a lot of content coming for you this week, guys. One more time, make sure to follow us on Twitter at Kyle Nabors, at Sean_Hammond, at Hub_Arkush. And if you are watching on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. Thank you, everyone who joined us live this morning and commented and gave us some questions. It helps us a lot to guide the show. Once again, for Hub Arkush and Sean Hammond, I am Kyle Nabors. We will talk to you guys later this week or next. Find out soon enough. Talk to you guys later.